Hey there, it's Laurie. Today I'm making some farmhouse Christmas DIYs. I went outside and I picked up some sticks and some pine cones. I used a few things that I had on hand along with some Dollar Tree supplies. I hope you have fun crafting with me, so let's get busy. Getting started, I'm using one of the Christmas signs from the Dollar Tree, but you can use any sign at all because we'll be working on the back. There's a raised house on the front, and I decided to remove it in case I use it for another project. To make the sign easier to paint, I did remove the hanger, and now I'm using some of my white acrylic paint and I'm giving it a coat. With the paint dry, I'm turning my sign to the side and I'll be using my pencil and a ruler. The sign has 3 notches on each end, so I'm placing my ruler on the top notch and then I'm making a straight line. I want it to be thicker, so I'm just sketching along it with my pencil. Now that I'm done, I want to smudge the pencil line, so I'm just rubbing my fingers along it. I'm moving my ruler down to the next notch and making another line. I'm sketching along it and then rubbing it in with my fingers. I then followed the same instructions and finished up on the last notch. Now that I'm done, I'm turning my sign so that my lines are vertical. I'm adding on a snowman and I found mine on Pinterest. I'll link it below in my description in case you'd like to use it. I printed mine out on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper at full size. I don't want the paper snowman to be attached permanently to the sign, so I'm using a glue stick. I added a few dots here and there, and that will just help hold it onto the sign. I centered it, pressed it in place, and then traced around it with my pencil. When I was done, I peeled away the paper snowman. I'm covering the outline of my snowman with an assortment of different sticks. I headed out into my yard looking for the straightest ones I could find, and then I trimmed off some branches. To attach them, I'm using one of the sticks, placing it at the bottom of the snowman, and then cutting it to size. I then hot glue it in place, making sure to cover my pencil line. I then measured and cut my next stick, adding it right above my first. I continued measuring, cutting, and adding on my sticks, working my way from the bottom up on my snowman. I'm pressing the sticks as close together as possible, but don't worry if you can see some white underneath, because when we're done, we're going to go back and fill in all those empty spaces. In a past video, I made a bunny using some sticks, and I'll have that linked below in case you'd like to check it out. This time, I'm going to change it up a bit and paint my snowman. I continue measuring and cutting my sticks, adding them with the glue gun, working my way up until I come to the beginning of the snowman's hat. I measure and cut the sticks for the brim, and then I hot glue them into place. This time I'm measuring and I'm cutting my sticks in the opposite direction. Once again, I'm following the lines on my snowman's hat and making sure that I cut enough sticks to cover the pencil marks. And once again, I then hot glued them all in place. To fill in the open spaces that you can see between the sticks, I just cut random pieces and I hot glued them over them to hide the white. One of the things that I like about this type of craft is each one will look just a little bit different depending on the sticks that you end up using. With the snowman's body complete, I cut some sticks for the top and the brim of the hat, and once again, I used my hot glue gun to attach them. With all the pieces in place, you can always leave your snowman as is and skip this next step, but I'm going to give mine just a bit of color. I'm using some white acrylic paint and I mixed it with a little bit of water to thin it out. When it was mixed together, I then used my paintbrush and gave my snowman a coat. For my snowman's hat, I'm using some black acrylic paint and I'm mixing that with water as well. I then used it to paint his hat and I made sure that I got in between all the individual sticks. I let the paint dry and now using my pencil, I'm sketching around the outside edges of the sign. Just like the lines in the center of my sign, I'm not being super fussy. I'm just kind of sketching along and then rubbing the pencil mark in with my fingers. To make it look like a piece of wood, I added some random lines here and there and I rubbed those in as well. I'm adding a scarf onto my snowman and I'm actually using a piece of leftover ribbon. To keep with the farmhouse vibe, mine is a 1.5-inch navy blue gingham ribbon. After placing it around my snowman's neck, I then cut it to size. To make it look a bit more like a scarf, I'm going to dovetail the ends, and all I do is fold my ribbon in half and then cut away the ends at an angle. I placed it back down on my snowman's neck and decided where I wanted to attach the two ribbons together, and then made a knot. I added on some hot glue and attached it around the snowman's neck. I'm adding some arms onto my snowman. I cut 2 small branches and left 2 points at the ends. I found their placement and then hot glued each one to the sign. To accent my snowman's hat, I'm adding on 3 tiny pine cones, and I found these at the Dollar Tree. They came in a package of about 25 or so. I used my glue gun and I added them to the corner of my snowman's hat. To finish up, I'm using a piece of white heavyweight cord that I already had on hand. But you can pretty much use anything as long as it's heavy enough to hold the sign. I used the original hanger holes and then I just made a couple of knots in the cord on the back. I did add a dot of hot glue on each knot. It was just to help hold them in place. Now that I'm done, it's a cute piece of decor that I can hang up not only during the holidays, but throughout the winter. hope you had fun making the snowman with me, and if you're new to my channel, please consider clicking on the little red subscribe button below and leaving me a thumbs up. And to all my returning friends, you know I am always so happy to see you. Getting started, I'm using one of the 12-inch wooden circles from the Dollar Tree, and I'm removing its hanger. I'm using one of the gold chargers from the Dollar Tree, and mine is kind of scratched up, so this was a great way to use it. I'm attaching the two together using my E6000. I added a generous amount of the E6000 on the outer edge of the wooden circle. When I was done, I then centered it on top of the gold charger. I pressed it in place and let it set up overnight. The two pieces are tightly adhered together, and I'm giving them both a coat with my white acrylic paint. I let it dry completely, and now I'm using a piece of sandpaper, and very gently I'm rubbing it over the dots on the outside of my sign so the little bit of gold will show through. I'm also rubbing it on the outside edge so you'll see a hint of gold there as well. If you prefer to have your sign completely white, just skip this step. I'm making a bow for my sign, and I'm using a 2-inch black burlap along with a 2.5-inch red buffalo check ribbon, and these came from Michael's. I'm making my bow using my bow maker, and I picked this up a while back on Amazon. I'm starting with the black burlap. I'm giving myself 2 10-inch tails and 4 5-inch loops. I'm now adding on my second ribbon, making 2 10-inch tails, but this time I'm making 4 4.5-inch loops. I'm attaching my bow together using a piece of floral wire. I place it over the top of the bow, pull it down tightly on both sides, and then give it a good twisting in the back. I removed the extra wire and opened my loops. I dovetailed the ends of my ribbons, which is super easy. I just folded them in half and cut away at an angle. I'm using another piece of the red buffalo check, or some people call it red gingham, about 10 inches long, and I'm making a knot in the center. I placed the knot over the middle of my bow and then tied it tightly in the back. When I had it in place, I then used my scissors to remove the excess ribbon. I placed my bow on the top of my sign and then hot glued it into place. With the bow in place, I then hot glued the tails to the side of my sign. As my focal point, I'm using 3 metal trees. They're garden stakes, and I found them at the Dollar Tree. I used my bolt cutter and I shortened them up so I only have the trees. I always like to find the placement before I permanently attach anything, so I placed all 3 of them onto my sign. Happy with their placement, I used my glue gun to attach them. To finish up, I'm adding a hanger onto my sign. I used the 2 original holes from the wooden circle and drilled through the plastic base. I'm using some Dollar Tree ribbon, and I cut it at 20 inches. With a little help from a wooden skewer, I pushed both ends of the ribbons through the holes and knotted them in the back. And now that I'm done, this cute farmhouse Christmas sign is ready to hang. I'm starting my pine cone swag by using 5 pine cones that I picked up in my yard, and they all measure about 7 inches long. These are the pine cones that I'm using because I am surrounded by pine trees, and there are millions of these pine cones, but you can pretty much use any type of pine cones for this project. To dry the sap, I place mine on a foil-lined cookie sheet. I then set my oven at 200 degrees and I bake them for about 20 to 30 minutes. After about 10 minutes, I do turn them to make sure that all sides are drying even. Now that they're dry, I'm using some of my white acrylic paint and I'm giving each a snowy accent. I'm using my paintbrush and I'm just dabbing some white paint onto the pine cone scales. There's no set amount, you can add as much or as little as you'd like. After all the paint is added, I set them aside until they're completely dry. I'm using 2 ribbons from the Dollar Tree to hang my pine cones. One is the 5/8 inch buffalo check ribbon and the other is the 5/8 inch farmhouse ribbon. I cut 3 buffalo check ribbons, one at 15, one at 17, and one at 23 inches. And I cut the farmhouse ribbon at 19 and 21 inches. Attaching the ribbons to the pine cones, I'm using my Gorilla hot glue sticks. I'm starting with my longest ribbon and I added some hot glue to the top and then attached the end of the ribbon. I then wrapped it around the stem, making sure that my pine cone would hang straight. If your pine cone doesn't have a stem to wrap the ribbon around, not a problem, just attach it to the top of the pine cone. I'm making my next 2 pine cones with the 19 and 21 inch farmhouse ribbon. Once again, I followed the same instructions. I added some hot glue to the top of my pine cone, attached the ribbon, and then wrapped it around the top, making sure that it would hang straight. My next pine cone did not have a stem, so I attached the ribbon directly to the top. I added on some hot glue and wrapped my ribbon in a circle. I let it set up for a couple of seconds and then pulled my ribbon upright so it would hang straight. I finished up by adding the remaining buffalo check ribbons onto the pine cones. To decorate them, I'm using 1 holly stem from the Dollar Tree. And I removed the berries and the leaves. The 3 holly leaves are attached, so I used my scissors to separate them. I'm adding a holly berry bunch and 2 leaves onto each pine cone. I added some hot glue onto the top, attached 1 leaf on one side and 1 on the other. I added the leaves onto the front because the stems, they'll be hidden with a bow. With those all in place, I'm using my glue gun and I'm attaching 1 set of berries in between the leaves on the top of the pine cones. With my holly leaves and berries attached to the pine cones, I'm using my buffalo check and farmhouse ribbon to make some simple bows. I'm making 3 simple bows using the buffalo check ribbon and 2 with the farmhouse ribbon. You can make yours any size you'd like. Mine measure about 3 inches across with 2-inch tails. And I did cut my tails at an angle. I'm attaching each of the bows to the matching hanging ribbon. I added a dot of hot glue just above the berries and attached my bow. To hang my ribbons, I'm using one of the heavy cardboard cylinders that comes inside the ribbon spools. I'm starting with the longest ribbon and I'm hot gluing it onto the center of the cardboard, about halfway around. I'm now attaching my two farmhouse ribbons, one on each side of the buffalo check, and they'll overlap just a bit. I'm finishing up by attaching my last two buffalo check ribbons, one on each end. I'm using some of the Dollar Tree 2.5-inch buffalo check ribbon to cover the cylinder. I added on some hot glue just where the ribbons would begin to hang and wrapped the buffalo check ribbon around. I'm making a bow using my bow maker from Amazon along with the Dollar Tree 2.5-inch buffalo check ribbon. I'm starting by making a 9-inch tail and 4 5-inch loops. With those complete, I'm continuing on with the same ribbon, and now I'm making 4 4-inch loops, and I'll finish off with another 9-inch tail. I'm using a piece of floral wire to hold my bow together, and I'm wrapping it around the center, pulling it down tightly and twisting it on the back. I'm fluffing out the bow loops, and then I'm cutting the two tail ends at an angle. I have a small piece of the buffalo check ribbon left, and I'm just going to tie it into a knot. I'm adding a dot of hot glue in the center of my bow, adding on the ribbon, making sure to center that knot, and hot gluing the two ends in the back. I snipped off the excess wire, and now I'm hot gluing it to the front of what will now become my hanger. To make the hanger, I'm using a piece of the 5/8-inch buffalo check ribbon. I placed it through the center of the holder, decided how long I wanted it to be, and then knotted the end. With the knot hidden on the inside, I then hot glued the two sides of the hanger. I finished up by using a short piece of the farmhouse ribbon. I wrapped it around my 5 ribbons and made a knot in the back. And with that, my farmhouse pinecone swag is complete. Here we are at the end of the video, and I really hope you had fun making these farmhouse Christmas DIYs with me. If you're new to my channel and you're thinking, hey, I'd like to come back and hang out with her again, don't forget to click that little red subscribe button below. If you're looking for more winter or Christmas home decor inspiration, I'll leave some ideas for you at the end of this video. I hope you all have an amazing day, stay safe and healthy, and I will see you soon. Bye, everybody.